name is Mo. I'm a mostly normal guy with a very, very unrelated day job. I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural episode of the Disclosure Diaries monthly update series. In this series, I'll be running you through the most relevant updates related to the official disclosure of UAP and non-human intelligence from the past month. In case you're unaware, I send out a weekly newsletter with updates of relevant disclosure events, with a concerted focus on credible and verifiable sources only. This episode will essentially run through the last couple of weeks worth of updates, homing in on the more pertinent events to provide some additional context. Before we get to all of that, I want to take the time to deliver a message to the folks who are perhaps just dipping their toes into this space for the first time. When I initially started looking into UAP, which stands for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, in case you're unaware, and all that comes with it, I had trouble sorting through all of the noise in search of what I would actually consider tangible signals. Confronted by a flood of unfamiliar jargon, personal theories, misinformation, and plain old bullshit, it's really not hard to understand why most sane people tune out of the conversation. That being said, over the last few years, I think there has objectively been a seismic shift in the Overton window regarding the UAP topic. I've covered the main highlights of this shift in a website I built called the DisclosureDiaries. And perhaps most relevantly, in a resource I call the Disclosure Timeline. It's actually a resource I put together with my own friends and family in mind to illustrate the unnervingly stark change in tone from particularly the US government over the last 5 to 6 years, using credible sources and verifiable statements on the record only. In contrast to the many forums and websites that I would personally hesitate to send to my friends, lest they get turned off by a deluge of conspiracy theories or worse, my goal was to assemble an overview that I consider, for lack of a better word, mom-friendly. Ultimately, I did all of this because I believe the UAP topic has reached a point in the discourse where it simply demands nuanced, destigmatized, and widespread public attention. And while I've obviously written fairly extensively about the reasons why I believe this to be the case, perhaps it can best be summarized by none other than Senator Marco Rubio, when he had the following to say regarding the extent of UAP whistleblower testimony he's been privy to so far.
One of two things is happening here. Either they're telling the truth, and that is something that obviously would be the biggest story in human history, or we have people in really important positions of government who are crazy. Most of these people at some point, or maybe even currently, have held very high clearances and high positions within our government. So you do ask yourself, like, what incentive would so many people with that kind of qualification, these are serious people, have to come forward and make something up?
Thanks, Marco. Great questions. As a final note, before I get on with the update, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I don't have any inside information of any sorts, nor do I have any concrete theories as to what's actually going on. At a time where new data crops up every couple of weeks, and the Overton window keeps evolving so rapidly before our eyes, I think it's reasonable, if not rational, to keep an open mind and even expect one's opinions to oscillate wildly. What I do have, however, is a strong desire to seek the truth in an intellectually honest way. Plus, a 6-year or so head start on trying to parse all of this. The latter is probably the only major difference between you and I. With all that said, let's dive in. The last week of September started off with a bang, that's for sure. According to an incisive piece of journalism from Michael Shellenberger, Andrew Mohar, and Phoebe Smith, and I'm just going to quote from the article here, so bear with me. They said, at least 30 other whistleblowers working for the federal government and/or government contractors have given testimony or a protected disclosure to the Office of the Intelligence Community Inspector General, the ICIG, the Defense Department Inspector General, the DoD IG, or to Congress over the last several months. The article goes on to state, testimony has included both first-hand and second-hand reports of crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs by US, Russian, and Chinese governments, the testing of materials obtained from retrieved craft, active and ongoing government disinformation operations, kinetic military action with UAPs, contact and collaboration with non-human intelligence, and the successful reverse engineering of a triangle-shaped craft with unconventional propulsion. Well, that's obviously a lot to unpack, and as usual, we, the public, will have to rely on the unnamed sources of journalists to try and piece together an understanding of the situation. If we take Michael, Andrew, and Phoebe at their journalistic word, there seem to be a few dozen additional whistleblowers, including first-hand witnesses, that are making claims that certainly rhyme with what David Grusch has already stated publicly. And more importantly, they're submitting these claims to the appropriate authorities. They're not writing books. They may never even come forward publicly, but they're providing testimony. Of course, this does not, in and of itself, confirm the veracity of the claims themselves, but it does give us a sense of the scale of what seems to be happening behind the scenes. And to their credit, the authors of the article do also provide a more prosaic explanation for these events, if you will, which, much like Marco Rubio's second option, if you can remember his dichotomy, essentially boils down to some sort of collective delusion or psychogenic episode running amok in the intelligence community. As we look to the future, it's hard to predict whether any of these whistleblowers will come forward publicly themselves, a la Grusch, but time will tell. In any case, their testimony has been recorded by the relevant authorities, which I will come back to later on in this update. In the meantime, the DoD sought emergency clearance to essentially expedite the creation of a contact form on the AARO or UAP, or the Pentagon UAP office's website to facilitate a public reporting mechanism for UAP. There's really not too much to read into here. This was something AARO was mandated to do, and the request was made by Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, to ensure it happens on time. And in case you're unaware, Hicks recently assumed personal and direct oversight of AARO. On the 1st of October, whistleblower David Grusch appeared in a Yes Theory YouTube video. The team at Yes Theory had exclusive access to Mr. Grusch throughout the time that he was testifying to Congress back in July. And this video essentially reiterates a lot of his claims and highlights Grusch's actually quite disinterested in being the figurehead of disclosure. Instead, he hopes his testimony will spark those in leadership positions to step up and make the full extent of what he considers to be the truth known to the public in a responsible manner. In line with Shellenberger's piece on the 25th of September, David also indicates that he's aware of others who are on the verge of coming out with their own testimony, saying, and again, I'll quote here, "There's some intel officers and other people in and out of government that are about to file complaints similar to what I did, because they said, fuck it, you know? And they were on these programs, like first-hand dudes, not people telling me stuff, literally the dudes touching the stuff." As I said before, only time will tell. All right, that brings us squarely into the second week of October. While there were a few things that happened, really the main update that caught my attention in particular was Daniel Sheehan's appearance on a podcast on the 7th of October. Daniel Sheehan has participated in numerous legal cases of public interest, including the Pentagon Papers case, the Watergate break-in case, and I believe he's been fairly extensively involved in the UAP topic for the past few years as well. If I'm not mistaken, he's even represented Lou Elizondo at some point. In any case, he appeared for an interview with Vinnie Adams and elaborated on the fact that his New Paradigm Institute, which is part of his pre-existing nonprofit, the Romero Institute, has been designated as one of the agencies authorized to nominate candidates to the review board, as it's defined in the UAP Disclosure Act legislation put forth by Senator Schumer. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of the review board or the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023 more broadly, I would strongly urge you to read the amendment language in full. It's a light 64-page legislative document, so get the popcorn ready. And I actually do mean that, because it's chock full of entertaining phrases like recovered technologies of unknown origin and biological evidence of non-human intelligence, or even controlled disclosure campaign plan. It's fun for the whole family. But in all seriousness, take the time to read it, or at the very least, take the time to read my summary of it, which also includes an overview of the definitions it introduces, as well as the key takeaways, and an overview of who exactly was involved in its writing, So if we scroll on down to the definition of the review board, we'll see that it refers to Section 7 within the original documentation, or the original legislation rather, where it reads, "The President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint, without regard to political affiliation, 9 citizens of the United States to serve as members of the Review Board, to ensure and facilitate the review, transmission to the archivist, and public disclosure of government records relating to unidentified anomalous phenomena." So if we go back, if you remember, Sheehan's New Paradigm Institute has apparently been designated as one of the agencies authorized to nominate people to this presidential review board. I would assume that while they're able to nominate people, the president and the Senate will still have to review these nominations and ultimately make a final selection. In any case, it is interesting to see what type of people are already being considered, at least as a possibility for this review board. And in this particular interview, Daniel Sheehan only mentions 2 of their primary nominees by name. He mentions John Podesta, the former White House Chief of Staff to President Clinton, as well as a counselor to Obama and the chairman of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense, Director of the CIA, White House Chief of Staff, a true establishment figure, if you will. Sheehan does not elaborate much further beyond this, or on any of the other candidates for that matter, but perhaps we'll learn more about that in the months to come, if and when the UAP Disclosure Act actually passes. This brings us to mid-October. In the week of October 9 to the 15th, multiple members of Congress reaffirmed their dedication to UAP transparency in light of the search for a new Speaker for the House, which was still ongoing at the time. I'll refrain from making any non-UAP related judgments on the current state of affairs in the US Congress, so all I can say is that it's somewhat reassuring to know that amidst the chaos, the UAP topic is and was still being championed to some extent. Now, here's where things get exciting. In the 3rd week of October, Dr. James Lakatsky, the former head of a previous government UFO program known as OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Applications Program, appeared on Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp's Weaponized podcast, ostensibly to promote the launch of his new book, which he co-authored with Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, both of whom were also at this podcast interview. And while he spent much of the interview derisively laughing his way through non-answer after non-answer, he did eventually deign to confirm one of the book's bolder claims, which I'll quote for you now. At the conclusion of a 2011 meeting in the Capitol building, with the U.S. Senator and an agency undersecretary, Lakatsky, the only one of this book's authors present, posed a question. He stated that the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had successfully gained access to its interior. This craft had a streamlined configuration suitable for aerodynamic flight, with no intakes, exhaust, wings, or control surfaces. In fact, it appeared not to have an engine, fuel tanks, or fuel. Lakatsky asked what was the purpose of this craft. Was it a life support craft, useful only for atmospheric reentry, or what? If it was a spacecraft, then how did it operate? Again, during the podcast interview, and speaking about this precise passage within the book, Lakatsky confirmed, "What's in the book is an exact statement of the event that occurred in the Congressional facility." I do want to highlight that, unlike David Grusch, Lakatsky has not made any of his claims under oath, nor does he have any plans to do so of his own volition. He did, however, have his statements and the contents of his book cleared for public release by the Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review, also known as DOPSR. Bear in mind, this clearance does not, again, speak to the veracity of the claims themselves, just that they are approved for public release. Just one day later, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Department of Defense published the unclassified version of the fiscal year 2023 Consolidated Annual Report on UAP. This report revealed that most UAP cases, as we all know, are resolved without issue, and mainly highlights the ongoing efforts to improve data collection sources, quality, and standardization to strengthen future analysis. As an example, the report stresses the importance of better integrating space and maritime domains into the scope of AARO's work. However, while it is certainly true that the majority of UAP reports are resolved to be prosaic objects or phenomena, the report does admit, and I quote, "There are some cases where reported UAP have potentially exhibited one or more concerning performance characteristics, such as high-speed travel or unusual maneuverability. AARO has deconflicted these cases with potential U.S. programs and continues to work closely with its DoD and intelligence community mission partners to identify and attribute any objects found in these cases. Although none of these UAP reports have been positively attributed to foreign activities, these cases continue to be investigated." In other words, there exists a small but undeniable class of cases that warrant further study. As far as AARO is aware, these cases do not represent foreign adversaries, nor do they represent objects that can be attributed to domestic programs. The reader is left to wonder, well, whose are they then? I would imagine there's a more detailed classified version of this report circling around Washington, but alas, all we have are the unclassified dregs, which in this case ultimately didn't do much to move the needle. Dr. Kirkpatrick, the head of AARO, also provided a few statements for a CNN article, and that was published just hours before the Consolidated report was released. In this article, again, he confirms that 2 to 4% of the dozens of cases they receive every month are truly anomalous and warrant further investigation. Addressing Grusch's claims, Kirkpatrick plays them down, saying he has no evidence that suggests anything extraterrestrial in nature. If anybody thinks they know where those things are, they should be coming to talk to us. That's why we have set up this entire architecture for people to securely come in and talk to us. It may be, however, that many of these whistleblowers are uncomfortable coming forward to AARO, for whatever reason that may be. That would explain why, according to those familiar with the matter, that many whistleblowers have gone straight to the Inspector Generals, and in some cases to Congress or the Senate directly. I will also add that it is currently unclear whether the use of the term extraterrestrial by Kirkpatrick and other members of the DoD encapsulates the full spectrum of non-human intelligence, as again has been defined quite thoroughly in the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. I would sincerely hope the next journalist who gets a chance to interact with any member of the DoD familiar with this topic could get them to clarify this semantic debate once and for all on the record. On the 22nd of October, Matt Ford from the Good Trouble Show made a bold allegation based on information from one of his well-respected sources. Essentially, he claims that Congress members and staff have become aware of a previously undisclosed council of advisors to the Pentagon's AARO program, allegedly comprising individuals associated with being gatekeepers of the UAP legacy programs themselves. In his April testimony to the House Armed Services Committee, Kirkpatrick specifically references a senior technical advisory group that essentially acts to peer review all case recommendations that come through the AARO office. Apparently, it seems that none of these members have been made public, and it is likely that this is the council Matt Ford was referring to. As far as I'm aware, federal law requires Congress and the public to be informed with respect to the number, purpose, membership, activities, and cost of any advisory committees. So I'd certainly be curious to hear the justification for keeping this information private. With that said, I'll move on to the most recent events that have unfolded over the past week. On the 24th of October, Senator Marco Rubio confirmed the Intelligence Community Inspector General's office is still investigating Grusch's whistleblower claims, which were originally filed with the ICIG back in May of 2022. While confirming that Grusch has provided testimony to Senate staffers, he made it clear the ICIG investigation needs to play out before the Senate can take things any further. The source of this quote, or the series of quotes, is Matt Laszlo's Ask-A-Paul, which I really can't recommend enough. It's an amazing service. Go check it out. He gets a lot of great snippets and exclusives with senators and congressmen with boots on the ground. He's doing God's work, as they say. In any case, earlier on, Tim Burchett had revealed that members of Congress will be granted a classified UAP-related briefing from the DoD Inspector General on the 26th of October, and with the Intelligence Community Inspector General on the 16th of November. Many commentators expected these sessions to hopefully be particularly illuminating, as David Grusch provided both IGs with UAP-related testimony over a year ago. For a full recap of this series of events, I'd recommend checking out the David Grusch specific timeline video on my YouTube channel. However, in a series of press interviews after the session, the main takeaway from various members of Congress is that the briefing was essentially pointless. Ultimately, it seems many of the Congress people in attendance simply lacked the requisite clearances to be fully read into the DoD IG's information on the topic. Representative Nancy Mace indicated the House Armed Services Committee or the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence may be better suited to pursue this type of information going forward. I must admit, I'm somewhat bemused as to why this clearance issue could not have been clarified in advance of the briefing, but hey, I'm just some guy on the internet. On a more positive note, many of the representatives in attendance left this session with a keen desire to establish a formal and independent select committee to more actively investigate UAP-related claims. Congressman Burchett confirmed he has even broached the topic with Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, who affirmed that that was something they were going to try and get going. I recently had a conversation on my channel with Lester Nare, the founder of UAP Caucus, where Lester emphasized the need for, as he puts it, a carrot and a stick approach to the UAP topic. In this analogy, the UAP Disclosure Act would represent a more passive, carrot-like approach, which is great, whereas the Select Committee represents an active stick approach, which would be fantastic to combine. Lester also put together a highly informative white paper, which underscores the relevance, scope, methodology, and objectives of such a Select Committee. I genuinely can't recommend it enough. Go check this out. Share it with as many people as you can. It really covers the main reasons and justifications for why a Select Committee is so important. Now that we're all up to speed with the latest in disclosure news, let's try and anticipate some of the updates we can look forward to in the coming weeks and months. According to Senator Gillibrand, when speaking with Matt Laszlo again from Ask-A-Paul, we can expect another public UAP hearing in line with AARO's latest report. No specific date has been specified, but I would imagine an update may be likely to materialize in the next few weeks. On November 15th, the Hayden Center is hosting an event titled UAP, The Search for Clarity, with none other than AARO's Dr. Kirkpatrick as the main guest. The hosts of the event have confirmed they will also be taking some questions from the in-person and virtual audience. I went ahead and took the liberty of compiling a few simple questions that I would like to see answered, and I certainly hope I get the chance to submit them during the event. Some of these questions include, does the DoD definition of extraterrestrial correlate to the UAPDA definition of non-human intelligence? Or, are you willing to name the members of AARO's Senior Technical Advisory Group? If not, on what basis? Or, does AARO plan on releasing data related to any of the truly non-prosaic and multi-sensor confirmed UAP incidents? And perhaps finally, describe and clarify the nature of your previous interactions with UAP whistleblower David Grusch, if any. These are just a sample of some of the questions that I would have, but I'm sure many of you folks listening or watching probably have your own, and I highly encourage you to do what you can to join the session. The link for registration is available on Twitter. I'll probably put it in the description of this video as well, so go ahead and register for that and make sure you submit questions if and when given the opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, members of Congress will be following up their DoD IG briefing with another similar meeting with the ICIG on the 16th of November. That's certainly something to look out for, although I expect the ICIG's capacity to discuss an ongoing investigation will be rather limited. And while the briefing is classified in nature, you can always look to the actions of those in attendance following the session to try and parse any significance from it. The Sol Foundation will be holding its inaugural conference at Stanford University from the 17th to the 19th of November, where they'll be covering the UAP topic from a variety of interesting and nuanced perspectives, I'm sure. So I'll be tuning in for that. If you look out a little bit more into the future and consider that the fact that the UAP Disclosure Act was indeed included in the Senate's version of the NDAA as an amendment, it still needs to be reconciled with Congress's version to produce a final compromise bill. Most commentators don't expect this to happen before December, so I'd look out for that around then. Members of Congress, as I've mentioned, have also stated a desire to establish a select committee, which I will probably touch on in a separate video entirely as well. And they've also stated a desire to host field hearings related to UAP. And finally, most tantalizingly, we've had several journalists now separately indicating the existence of additional whistleblowers and first-hand witnesses who are in the process of providing their testimony to the relevant authorities. Only time will tell whether any of these figures and their claims will trickle on out into the public sphere. With that said, we've officially reached the end of my very first video update on the state of disclosure as of October 2023. This video really only covers the events that unfolded over the last few weeks. And if you need a refresher on what has happened since 2017, with a focus on credible and verifiable official updates, I'd strongly urge you to check out the disclosure timeline. If you'd like to keep up with these level-headed disclosure reviews, feel free to subscribe to my weekly updates at DisclosureDiaries.com or follow me on Twitter. I hope you found this video informative, and don't hesitate to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Till next time, stay humble, stay curious, stay sane.